we've asked our panel to react to the film, to share a little bit about their lives, and also to reflect on the current events going on in the church and the status of women religious. And so I'd like to invite them. You'll see, many of you received a handout that has a longer bio for each of our panelists. Mary Walsh from the Lynch School of Education will be moderating the conversation. And our panelists are Sister Barbara Quinn from the School of Theology and Ministry, Sister Callista Roy from the Connell School of Nursing, and Sister Annette McDermott, a doctoral candidate in the Department of Political Science. I want to thank you all and for being willing to be here and to share your stories with us. So without any delay, thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I'm Mary Walsh, and it's my pleasure this evening to moderate a conversation. I'm Mary Walsh, and it's my pleasure this evening to moderate a conversation among three religious women. And from my experience meeting with them earlier this week, I am just about unnecessary up here. They have so much to say. So we're going to let the conversation flow among them. And I'll just start it off asking them how this film speaks to them. What in the film particularly spoke to them? Do we have sound?
I'll start. And I think all of us can say very truthfully, this is our life. These, in fact, are the parallel stories that we've all lived through. And the idea of the pioneers who constantly, move toward what the needs of the time are, that's what our communities were founded on and moved toward. Let me take just one incident and bring you from there up to here. That one fact that 6 patients today are admitted to hospitals founded by religious women. I'm a nurse, and my community founded the first hospital in Arizona, the whole state of Arizona, the territory of Arizona, I should say. And they went by train from St. Louis to San Francisco, by steamship San Francisco to San Diego, and outboard wagon to Arizona. They saw the need, they were building railroads, they saw the need for health care, they built a hospital, which is still there. I spent my first year as a registered nurse working in that hospital, but what I want to tell you is this week, one of our sisters, who actually is a physician, in Phoenix, Arizona, cut the ribbon for a whole 2-story building, which is, the title of the whole thing is like Circle the City. She cares for the homeless. She has managed to raise all the money and build this institution, which is for homeless people to recover. So just think of, so that's what I'm saying about the call being the same and being true to it.
Thanks, Callista. We're going to have to.
I
You're all
have,
set.
yes. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Great. To pick up on that theme of being pioneers, one of the things I loved about that particular segment is that it wasn't a case so much that sisters in a very self-conscious way said, now we're going to be pioneers. What it was an internal, interior impetus to say, what are the needs of our people now, and how is the Spirit impelling us to address those needs? And I think that that is a very core element, dynamism in what's happening in our church today as well, because one of the particular gifts of religious communities is to really follow the lead of the Spirit, and you can't control that. So the integrity, the authenticity of being able to say, there's the need, there's the call, there's the pull. If that's too confined, you lose the very heart of the gift itself, the charism itself. So,
and I came up in the Kumbaya era. I just celebrated my 25th anniversary as a Sister of St. Joseph, which I was really glad for, because then I have my jacket in terms of I was able to go and get something new instead of my grad clothing. So I'm really excited to wear it with you tonight. But coming up from that era and seeing the film and being a student in political science, but I'm looking at the public engagement of American Catholic sisters since Vatican II. I've been able to steep deeply into so much of the topics and try to understand. And to understand, because I think I came in a divided era. I remember the first time I walked to meet the president, and she says, we have nothing to offer you. I remember her saying that. She says, why do you come? And I was just struck by that. I was like, you could see what you have to offer. That history, the spirit, the love. I was touched as soon as I was a child, from the pioneer perspective. They kept the sisters at my high school kept participating in things that I've never seen women participate in. They kept challenging us, and they kept using this word, the more. And I loved the more. It kept tantalizing me and calling me. And I remember just as they changed out of the habit, and it was an awkward moment. We were teasing them all the time. Oh my gosh, how much polyester is there? I just remember we were terrible, but we were like, really? That type of thing. But I was so impressed with the shifting, and they kept explaining to us why they were making those shifts. And one of the things that touched me deeply was that I was in high school, and I remember I was doing something late after school, probably a sport. And I looked out the window, one of our sisters was meeting a woman one of those girls who had just left the school because she had become pregnant. And she met her behind a tree, probably thinking she had enough privacy, but I was there looking. And I looked out, and she was giving her a gift, a baby layette outfit. And I just remember going, yes, that's the more. She knew how to meet with love, and she was there. And I kept wanting to be something different, because in the 1970s, 80s, we had all of life in front of us. But that more kept haunting me, and you could see it throughout the pioneering, that there is something more that keeps driving the women, and that community, that sense of spirit, the call, and hearing. I love staying up at night and listening to the stories as a novice. I would just stay and listen to stories across and just, tell me more. I went down to the Marinol sisters in Nicaragua, and staying up at night on hammocks and listening to these incredible stories. And I felt so gifted. I never really understood why people weren't entering, because I can't complain. I have been one happy chica for 25 years. But it's that pioneering, the love that really strikes me.
I think there's one thing that is it is difficult for people to understand why, quote, we changed everything. But it really was the following of the spirit of the times. Vatican II had called us to look at our founders of our communities and to go to that spirit. And then many years later, I read an article by Mary Schneider, Sister Mary Schneiders, who explained, and which is this time when we start reflecting on what Vatican II did, I think it's an important thought, that when our congregations were founded, many of them, mine 1650 in France, we really led a monastic life, although we were an active order from the beginning. However, trying to keep those two together, monasticism, as you saw in the cloistered sisters, those rules, along with the active life that we had, often ran, it really did clash. And I can give you a story. I was there at St. Mary's Hospital in Tucson, Arizona, and we still had the old rules you had to, even for lunch, the bell would ring, you had to be there and, you know, bow, and if you were late, you know, that was a penalty. You were to bow in and be sorry for this. But I'm in the hospital starting an IV on a patient, and that bell rings, and you know, it's the most, and I think, I have just got to hit this vein and get this going. And I mean, the point was, the two were at odds with each other. So the point was, we got the point. We didn't have to do it that way, you know, and it did not mean that we gave up anything of our commitment. We have, if anything, become incredibly more prayerful. And as our works have taken us farther apart, we are more community related. And I think, I'm sure my colleagues would say the same.
You know, one of the things that I loved about that film that, again, I think throws a lot of light on today, do you remember this segment where the sisters, the Ursulines, spoke up to President Jefferson because they saw the need and they thought, now we've got to work with this constraint here. That impulse, again, to speak the truth and to speak it in as discerning a way as possible is really from the start. And again, I think it just throws a lot of light onto our current situation, if we can jump to that, our current moment. Our sense of obedience is different sometimes than the sense of obedience from the institutional church. And what I mean by that is an institution is a legitimate body that has a very real and right calling to preserve and protect and extend. That's the nature of an institution. Religious life doesn't fall within that. It falls within a genre that would be called charismatic and spirit-filled and led, that cannot be constrained. And so the notion of obedience in an institution is, now get in line, you know, shape up, buck up. The notion of obedience in a charismatic religious community is one that is really rooted in discernment and really following the lead of the Spirit. And so this example that Callista gave about, now this doesn't make sense, I've got a patient in front of me who needs this IV and needs to have it done carefully, clashes with the rule. Well, the impulse in the Spirit is to say, now what makes sense in love here? And we will be free enough to follow that. Well, that doesn't always go down well. And that's one of the things that I think has really shaken the troops. That there's a great fear that has been stirred up because these two notions of obedience really do clash at times, even though both are very legitimate. They're like, you know, two cousins, I guess, who don't always get along because they come at things quite differently. So it just is an insight, I think, about what's happening today. And it started back with those Ursulines and before that. This summer was the Feast of Thomas More. And there was a reference made, something that he said that I really think about a lot. He said to the king, I am the king's faithful servant, but I'm God's first. Mm-hmm. And that's the heart of it.
In other words, what you're saying is conscience is primary.
Right. Yeah. Mm.
Can I ask you how the women in your religious communities are thinking about this conversation with Rome that's happening now and the challenging investigation and the follow-up?
Well, I can say that on one level, it depends on who you ask. I mean, in terms of, there's a lot of feelings of tremendous, for a lot of our sisters in our community, of hurt. I don't know how many sisters have said, but Annette, we were just doing what we were told. You know, they were told about Vatican II. They were told to study the document, Gaudium in Spes, and they're totally confused by, if we did what we were told, then how could we be in so much trouble? You know, in the most simplistic way. And I think it's well past anything of anger. I think it was shock. and for the largest group of our sisters. And I have, because of some of my research, I've been across the country having the opportunity to be in some other congregations and houses, and that's pretty much consistent throughout, because they felt they're being so authentic to the gospel. And I think what I have noticed is that, again, in some of my research and in the conversations with others in my own community, is that up until Vatican II, you were so directly connected to ecclesial institutions. It was the schools, it was the hospital, and it was the way they were structured. But with Gaudium and Spes and Lumen Gentium, there was a sense of Perfecti Caritatis, well, we need to go out. We need to be with this, where the needs are, the signs of times. So I think there's a proliferation of 501c3 organizations, charitable organizations. So there's soup kitchens set up, shelters, programs for battered women, after school programs, whatever, that usually in the United States require an IRS construction. You have to get the 501c3, you have your independent lay board, you get your funders. Well, that moved a little bit of distance from direct involvement of the church. And I think relationships changed because you weren't with the parish priest every day. You weren't with the bishop on a regular basis. They had to be accountable to those boards, as well as to the funders, to the IRS, to the Secretary of State in filing documents. So I think there's a lot of accountability where prior to Vatican II, there was pretty singular accountability. So I think that has made a big shift in where, if you're following the needs, this is where I think part of what happens to you. And I think that relationship has strained things, because where before many sisters would have been able to go and say, okay, I know him, I can speak to him, or I know this. There could be a little bit more distance between the parties now. So having those conversations, I can say my community in Springfield, we are close in the relationships. The sisters are, because mostly are pastoral or in the schools, but we're also a smaller region. The Catholic community is more intimate, so we're with each other for a lot of different events. That allowed us, because of the intimacy of the relationship, to go and just say, how come? And just speak from our heart. So I think there is all of that.
I would say in my community, a lot of sadness added to the hurt. Really very, very sad. Again, with the same rationale, how could this be? But at the same time, a coming together immediately, and actually Pat Farrell, president of LCWR, at this past meeting, in her address, she used the words galvanize the solidarity among us. And that was very true. If we'd ever thought about differences among us, no, we were just one right there, and that's happened with women religious all over the world, where, for example, we had a small prayer to the Spirit while this is going on, and we're discerning what's happening in response to the doctrinal assessment, is the words. But the prayer, what happened is the women religious with congregations all over the world who were headquartered in Rome took it and translated it in all these languages. So that idea of, it wasn't long, I could see it in my own community, but then I could see it much more broadly, this galvanizing the solidarity among us. In other words, we're not shaking in our boots. The fact is, we know who we are, and we value that so immensely that it's a matter of, we will stay in the dialogue and we will figure it out, because it's bigger than we are. And I think, but there's also this notion that we don't want to spend too much energy on it, because we have other things to do, and that really matters to us.
Very true.
Yeah. So
I think just take that one step further, I couldn't agree more that it has really been a very unifying force among women's communities, and I would say that within our own too. But I'd take it another step and say that it also has a great deal to do with the laity in the church as well. Mm-hmm. I think the Vatican must have lost their breath when they saw the pushback from laity saying, what are you doing? And I think that, for me, is the deepest sentiment. It's heartbreaking to me, quite honestly, because the strain that was caught by this, in this pushback, is the life of the church has been coming alive. The spirit of Vatican II has invited us and supported us to grow up in our church and really be active members in our church. And why is this pushback happening now? So that I think, I think it has a lot to do with Vatican II. Sandra Schneiders has a book entitled Prophets in Their Own Country, and she quotes Cardinal Rodet, who was in charge of the Congregation of Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life. Try that again.
You did well.
But he's the one that was really very much the spokesperson and the lead person from the Vatican on this. And she quotes him as saying that Vatican II precipitated the first worldwide crisis in the history of the church, and women religious are primary promoters of that. Now think about that in terms of discerning, and I just want to say discerning because I think there's good and not so good in most things. But the new evangelization movement that will be inaugurated this month among the bishops is probably going to be touching some of these nerves. Where does Vatican II take root and continue to grow? And where is there an impulse to roll it back? And I think honestly, as laity, as members of religious communities, as priests, as brothers, we really have to be discerning about that. And try to be as courageous as that Ursuline nun who spoke up to Thomas Jefferson. And try to really speak the truth about what is happening. And really deeply, pray deeply and follow the lead of the Spirit on this. Because I think what's happening is a very, very deep and wide movement that maybe we gave rise to in this investigation, but
That speaks more broadly to the church.
right.
I think it's fascinating too that the discussion has been played out, by way of National Public Radio, and Terry Gross being, hosting both Bishop Blair and Sister Pat Farrell, and I just think that the fact that that setting is taking place, that the discussion is that broad, I think that's probably why some of our sisters may have gone and would have been felt much more abandoned, lost, confused, and I think we would have much more of a different sense. But there was so much hope because of exactly what Barbara's pointed out in terms of the laity and where folks started speaking out. And I think the fact that that encouragement and hope is really so important, so much beyond us. I think also when it transferred from Beyond Sisters to the broader community, this isn't about us. And that piece of it happened. Then I think there was a sense of great contemplation. Our prayer has been great. The solidarity has been great. And it was like, okay, let's get over the pity party. Let's just go now and start just being who we are and not, looking over our shoulders on that, but just trusting the Spirit and moving forward. And we've actually had a woman enter our community in the midst of all this. So, what greater sense of hope that someone in all the messiness says, I want to walk with you through this messiness.
I think the idea of following the Spirit, there was a theme that came out of the LCWR conference. I'm just reading the documents and talking to people who are there, and also from the keynote speaker as well, but that crises precedes transformation. And is it possible that the Spirit is calling forth something new and that we're part of that process? And I think it was Archbishop Hunthausen who said that when he was asked about when he was being questioned by the Vatican, the greatest of all theologies is the theology of struggle. Stay in the struggle. So maybe, and see, we have vowed our lives and spent our whole lives living the living and dying of Christ. And so this is not really new, but it's a whole new arena and it's a whole new level. So do we know that we don't know that this is some transformation of the church that will take place. But maybe it is, and maybe, you know, we're meant to be a part of that. So whatever sadness, pain we go through is part of that process, and we gladly give it. The way those women who went, Pat Farrell herself, the president at the time all this is going on, was a sister who went to Chile during the time of Pinochet, and then went and took Sister Ida's place in El Salvador. These women willing to give their lives, and that's us, you know. And it's not so. The same way the women at the sisters at Galveston gave their lives trying to save those children. So, but we do say, no, we don't really know what's going to come out of this. We really don't. But we are willing to just follow the Spirit, and we have added to our times of contemplation. We know we have to come from a place of deep prayer to deal with this at all, within ourselves as well as for our church, which we love.
You know, maybe something that Pat Farrell said, I for one, and I think so many of us are so proud of the way LCWR leadership has handled this. And some of her kind of summarizing invitations, I guess, to us about the way we need to go forward, I think is really applicable to all of us. She talked about being humble, to know that we all have a little piece of the truth. Not a one of us has it all. So to be humble, but to remain true to who we say we are, which for us was dialogic and transparent and collaborative, and to be courageous and go as far as we can to keep the conversation going, but not to the point of losing our soul. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a wonderful summary of living the gospel life. And that was a great witness that speaks to me, and I think speaks to all of us. So that's a good, hopeful note.